Hello, scruff tards, weirdos, and, well, the usual strange and odd people you come across online. Welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy, and this is Scruffy Tales. And Russia is in slight trouble, it seems, as Ukraine secures a vital bridge they lost the other day. It does look as if Ukraine has managed to push back in and reclaimed it. And in Novoivanovka, we are seeing Ukrainian vehicles pushing into territory that a day or two ago was under Russian control. So Ukraine, they're pushing back and forcing Russia to fall back at some crucial locations. And we'll also take a look at the tactics that I do believe Ukraine is employing to achieve these successes in Kursk. So this is Andrew Perpetua's map up in Kursk. So he has one interesting update here, or has a couple of them. But if we take a look here, this was the map for the 14th. Russia had moved down into Novaya Sorichna. Then they were pushed up. Most mappers agree they were pushed up here. Then we had a now famous shootout between a Bradley and a couple of Russian BTRs right here. But when we move to the 15th, Andrew makes this update that Ukraine has, reclaimed all of this. Probably based on this fact that we have Russian drone attacks on the 15th in this, whatever this is. Take a look at this one here. As you can see, here it is coming in, striking these buildings. So if Russia is sending in drones up here, obviously you have Ukrainians up here as well. So there might actually be something to it. And maybe Ukraine has reclaimed Olgovka and are now pushing up into Progrebki in a successful counter move after that initial Russian push down towards what's the name of the town? Malaya Lokna, right? Keep forgetting it. Malaya Lokna over here. So they tried to push down here, securing that bridge, and then they wanted the last bridge at Malaya Lokna. But it appears as if Ukraine might actually have pushed back north and are once again in control of this vital bridge here at Pogrebki. Very interesting. And since Russia is indeed attacking here, there's probably something to it. Would be my guess, right? What's happening down here? Ukrainian tank damage. Ukrainian tank blasting Russian positions on the 15th as well. So this forest here is not under Russian control. Ukraine is operating in here. Interesting. BTR abandoned, and then you have a bunch of Ukrainian drone attacks all over Bukovka. Russia is still in Darino fighting. But this here, really interesting, as well as this. Ukraine has clearly pushed into what was Russian positions and appears to be trying to push Russia back. And, by the looks of it, they are succeeding. Also, if we move down to the Kharkiv front, we will zoom in here. Ukraine is shelling within Suravlyovka, and so Ukraine still has a presence here, disrupting the logistics leading into this part of the front line and making life difficult for the Russians fighting here around Lubovka. So if we jump on over to my map, zooming in here on Progrebki, all of Orlovka and Pogrebki, unclear who is in control. It certainly looks like as if Ukraine has pushed in here with these attacks on these buildings by Russia. And that would mean Ukraine is back in control of this crucial bridge. and they can, in doing that, they can now more. Well, they always need to push Russia back a bit further here in the north, but they are in control of the bridges that allows them to continue operating up here in the north. So very important push made by Ukraine, without a doubt. And then you also have this forest here between Nova Ivanovka and Leonodivo being contested, right in the outskirts of Nova Ivanovka, with Ukraine pushing in. We'll see if they establish a presence or if Russia pushes them back. But I mean, the fight ain't over. It's going back and forth, yeah, super crucial. If Ukraine can push in here, it's gonna be difficult for Russia to move along this road here towards this last bridge over at Malaya Loknea. And but this, I did not expect this. I thought Russia would hold on to this more aggressively, considering the bridge in the area. But it appears as if, well, they got schwacked well and truly good by Ukraine, and Ukraine has more than likely pushed into Pokretki and is in control of a vast majority of the town itself. So I want to touch on this again. I talked about this in my previous video, but I'm going to return to the subject here of how it appears as if Ukraine is conducting its defense. We saw evidence of it when they were defending Avdiivka, and we've now read reports from the fighting in Kursk that they're basically doing the same thing. So here we have, I'm going to use a hypothetical made-up situation here. With the Russian forces up here in the north, they have this town, and they want to cross these fields, these windbreaks, and reach the smaller towns down here. And you have Ukrainian positions outside of these towns, and in between you have the gray area. Ukraine, well, Russia defends every inch to the last man, and then they fall back when they can't hold any longer at all, and they just keep throwing troops into the defensive line to hold it for as long as possible, preferably without having to fall back at all. That's the Russian way, and that is not very cost effective when we look at how many troops you're spending to hold that line. Ukraine does it slightly differently. Ukraine is holding territory down here, and they want to fight in the gray zone, but they don't want to hold terrain. They don't want to hold ground in the gray zone. So what Russia wants to do, say in this case, they want to come this way and establish presence here and grab this windbreak. What Ukraine does in this case, like I've mentioned before, is when they use their drones to spot Russian forces gather, they open fire with artillery at the location where the Russians are gathering. And we at Avdiivka, we also saw Ukraine using Bradleys to use volley fire from a mile or two away, and just let the chain gun ammo fly in and drop down on the windbreaks where the Russians were hiding. So they strike the Russians here with artillery where they're gathering, and then as the Russians are crossing these wide open fields, Ukraine calls in drones and more artillery strikes on the Russians as they're crossing the big fields. And then if any Russian vehicles make it across, they call in more drones and mortar fire on the location where the Russians are dropped off. As you can imagine, this will be costly for the Russians, and not all that many troops make it across. This is basically what we've heard how Ukraine does it in Kursk, and this is how they did it at Avdiivka. And what they did at Avdiivka, and I'm assuming Ukraine is doing something similar in Kursk. What they did in Avdiivka is that when Russia deployed troops at a windbreak or wherever, then Ukraine had 2 or 3 APCs or infantry fighting vehicles that left their defensive positions. Sorry, wrong one. Damn it, here we go. Away you go. And they would use them to launch an assault at the Russian positions, and that were now held by only a handful of guys. So you started out with, say, 6 vehicles. You took out 2 or 3, tried to push across with 3 or 4. You lose another 2, and only 1 or 2 of them reach the final destination. And they drop off 8, 16 guys, and all of a sudden they get attacked by drones and mortars. You lose 4 or 6 guys. You only have 8 or 10 left, and now 3 armored vehicles rush in and drop off 15 to 20 troops that now hunt you down and take you out. So that is how Ukraine had a very effective defense in and around Avdiivka, and they are doing something very similar in Kursk, fighting in the gray zone. And when this Russian forward position is destroyed, the Ukrainians return to friendly lines. They don't stay around and defend territory in the gray zone. So they whittle down the Russians as they're trying to push across these wide open fields. Only a handful of Russians make it across to the objective, and that is when Ukraine launches a counter-assault with armored vehicles, push in, take out the surviving Russians, and then they fall back to friendly lines and avoid incoming drones, incoming artillery, and so on. So this is how Ukraine they very effectively defended Avdiivka in this way, and it appears as if we're seeing the exact same thing going on in Kursk, where Ukraine wants to fight the Russians in the gray area, in the gray zone, but they don't try and hold terrain. They fall back and then rinse and repeat. And we've also heard a lot of reports how Russia, just keeps sending one wave after the other at the Ukrainian positions, and often they will follow a road towards the Ukrainians and do it over and over, sending dozens of vehicles along one road. And like we just pointed out, Ukraine will hit them with artillery early on. Wrong one. Hit them with artillery early on, take them out in an early stage, use drones to take them out in the fields, and then you have minefields, and when the Russians so the Russians are going to come, what the hell? The Russians are coming down here, they get hit by artillery, they continue, and they get hit by drones and lose a lot of vehicles, move on again, hit minefields, and now they're stuck. And here they are all of a sudden open to attack from 84s, RPGs, NLAWs, or whatever the Ukrainians are using, and it's just a massacre. And if the Russians are caught out in the open, Ukraine will rely on cluster munitions to hit them even further still. So I mean, it's just, as you can imagine, as the Russians are relying on these tactics, they're gonna lose 5, 6, 10 vehicles really quickly in just the space of 20-30 minutes. And each vehicle has a crew of 3, and each transport carries 8 to 10 guys, and maybe has 6 to 8 guys on top of them as well. I mean, if you have 10 vehicles with 3 crews each, and they each carry 10 to 16 troops, you're gonna get a lot of casualties really fast, and that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing. So why Russia has chosen these specific tactics, I don't know, because even if they have an unlimited supply of troops, they don't have an unlimited supply of transports, of vehicles. So, I mean, if they run out of vehicles, they can't rush the enemy. It's not like they're going to send out the infantry to run across these fields. Strange choices here from Russia, and it's costing them. And they're losing hundreds of troops in, like I said, 20-30 minutes trying to conduct these assaults. So what happened here at Pogrebki is that the Russians started coming down this way, pushed into Pogrebki, took the town, and then immediately launched a big assault, continued south along the river into Novaya Sorochna, and got this far, aiming for Staraya Sorochna and that bridge. This bridge here is what they wanted. And as they pushed down here, well, as you can imagine, going deeper and deeper into this area here, there were just Ukrainians all over the place, engaging them from every angle. And eventually these forces here had to fall back, and Ukraine could then follow them up to Orlovka. And now, having taken out so many Russians down here in Novaya Sorochna and taken out troops in Orlovka, Ukraine apparently has managed to push in to Pogrebki, having whittled down the Russians to such a degree here in these battles that Russia is now unable to hold territory in Pogrebki, and the Ukrainians are pushing out to Marevka, moved up, certainly up here, because this is where Russia has been bombing them. And so yeah, as you can see, if you let the enemy come in and fight them in the gray zone, then you can launch that big counter push eventually and force him back, because you have taken out so many of his forces as he's doing these reckless assaults. So that is maybe how Ukraine can stay in the fight, letting the Russians coming in, taking them down, whittle them down, and then push them back. And Russia will have orders from on high, from Putin and Moscow. You have to kick Ukraine out of Kursk, so Russia will throw in all the troops they have again. Maybe Ukraine might be pushed back down here again, but rinse and repeat. Ukraine can return, push the Russians back and forth, and Russia will lose hundreds and thousands of troops. Meanwhile, Ukraine loses 20 or maybe 50, maybe a couple of hundred compared to the thousands that Russia will lose. So this here, I think this is what we're going to be seeing now. And I mean, we're seeing the same thing here. Russia pushing strong into Novaya Ivanovka, trying to reach Leonidovo, losing hundreds of guys in the process, and Ukraine can now move in since Russia has lost so many troops, and Ukraine can then push them back. And with orders from Moscow to take Kursk by, at any cost, Russia will throw in even more guys, Ukraine will fall back, kill as many as possible, and then launch a counter-assault. And I think this is what we're going to see happening all over the place, back and forth. And it's interesting here with Novaya Ivanovka as well. So this is clearly contested because we have Ukrainians here engaging Russians along this street or road here on these buildings. So this is where we have the Ukrainians with their tanks engaging Russian targets. So everything east of this position here is potentially in Ukrainian control if they can move their vehicles through these woods all the way up here. And this is where they are engaging targets. I mean, having a vehicle here is really important. And I mean, yes, it is important, but because if you consider what that means if you have a vehicle here and he's covering this road, Russian troops can't move from up here down, wrong one, I wanted this one, from up here and down here, because then they're crossing the open spaces where you have a vehicle firing along. So the vehicle back here is now cutting the Russians north of this main street or road off from the Russians to the south. That means Russia can't move back and forth. That means if, say, Ukraine sends in the infantry, hang on, up here, right? Then these Russians up here, they can't get support from Russians down here. Wide open spaces, so Russia can't get support from up here or here. That means Ukraine should, in theory, have the ability to secure this area, and then they might jump on over to this area as well. And then you can basically do the same down here, moving along here. The Russians in these buildings can't get support from up here because Ukrainian vehicles are securing the street or road here, denying Russia to move between these areas. And Ukraine can obviously also make a push down this way to put pressure on the Russians down here. So having a vehicle here, as it appears Ukraine had the other day, or right, is super crucial. Now, yes, you can call in drones and what have you to hunt it down, but still, having the vehicle here, covering the street or road, makes it difficult for Russia to move freely between the combat areas here in this part of town, and Ukraine could use that to put pressure on the Russians up here that are isolated, and the same down here. It will allow Ukraine to push along the street from building to building without having to worry about getting attacked from the north with Russians coming in behind them and what have you, if a vehicle stays here. And the point is, the vehicle needs to stay back here and focus on covering this street or road. Because if the vehicle takes point, he will run into anti-tank weapons. He will be taken out by an RPG. He needs to stay here and focus on the road and making sure no Russians runs across, and let the infantry push up. And when the infantry runs into a fortified position, then maybe then the vehicle can maneuver a bit, find a good angle, and take a shot if it's a tank, and obliterate the enemy fortification. And then the infantry can move in, clear it out, and push on. So the vehicle is a support weapon here. It is not the offensive unit. It's a support unit that allows the infantry to secure certain sections of the settlement, the village, the town, the urban area. So so we have a tank. He's here. He's covering the street. He might reposition so that he can get an angle down here, or maybe reposition and get an angle over here. The important thing is, before he makes those moves, that he has some buddies moving with him, so that they can hang on, here we go, maybe secure this area first before moving up, and certainly securing this area. And then say that we have the tank, he's covering the street, Russia can't move across, they're basically stuck where they are at. Ukraine can then begin with taking this part, and as Ukraine now wants to begin advancing south of the street through these buildings, when you have Ukraine is up here, they can begin firing a lot of arrows here. I need to remove arrows. Okay, let's do that all over again. Sorry. So Ukraine has now, in theory, secured this patch of woods. You have a tank, he's covering the street, he might reposition, yada yada. And you have Ukrainians here. These Ukrainians, they want to push down here now. With Ukrainians up here, they are now in a position where they can target certain buildings in support of these units. So when they are moving, they can take one building, then the next, and maintaining communications with these guys, they can ask these guys to move their fire further down the street, allowing them to move it. And remember, if you have the calibers they're using with AK-74s, they will punch straight through 2 or 3 walls without issue at all. So they're going, when they're shooting up here into these buildings, those bullets will go straight through. So when they're up here, setting up a couple of machine guns, firing at these buildings, as long as you maintain communication and just tell them, okay, switch to the next building. We are now ready to, let's see here. So they take this building, and while they're engaging this building, the Ukrainians up here are firing at this building. Now, when they are ready to move in here, they need to communicate with these guys to move their fire down here instead and fire at the buildings down here. So you maintain this communication, and they can move their fire and suppressing the next building over, the next building over. So the Ukrainians that are on the assault element, they can focus on their building, not having to worry about getting friendly fire from the north. At the same time, you had a vehicle over here focusing on the street, making sure Russians aren't moving across, or that any vehicles are moving up to support the Russians and what have you. And should they run into a building that is a fortified position, a stronghold that they can't overcome with infantry, that's when the vehicle now can move up. Since the infantry has secured the areas north and south of the street here, the vehicle can move up, get an angle on that fortification. These guys fall back. The tank or the infantry fighting vehicle opens fire on the stronghold, takes it out, and then you begin the assault again. So if Ukraine can keep the vehicle here without that vehicle getting taken out by a drone, I'm thinking Ukraine will be able to secure the street pretty comfortably, and at least up until this point, because here the gaps here are where Russia will defend from continued Ukrainian pushes, because here Ukraine is now in a position where they have to cross an open area, and that favors the Russians. So I'm not surprised if we will see in the coming days that this area here becomes Ukrainian, and that Ukraine eventually gets this far, and then they run into trouble, because then they face these wide open areas that favors the Russian defenders. And we'll see if the Russians can throw meat into the meat grinder and push Ukraine back. But this seems kind of likely if Ukraine has been able to move a vehicle this far into Novy Ivanovka at this point. And that's going to have to be it for this time around. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.